We stand today in Ukraine at a diplomatic precipice. These are the words of Volodymyr Zelensky just a few hours ago, the president of a country fighting an existential war, the largest war in Europe in 80 years. Ukraine faces a very difficult choice, the loss of dignity or the loss of a key partner. That is how stark Zelensky believes is his choice when presented just in the last 24 hours, texts written by the Trump administration, introduced by Dan Driscoll, who is the most senior civilian in the U.S. Army, but in Kyiv on a diplomatic mission. The texts require Ukraine, number one, to give up the rest of Donetsk, territory that Russia has not captured militarily for 11 years, and that territory would be internationally recognized as Russian but demilitarized. The U.S. would then recognize not only the whole of the Donbass, but occupied Crimea and the occupied portions of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson as de facto Russian. Full amnesty would be given to all parties, meaning no pursuit of Russian war crimes in Ukraine. All 32 members of NATO would have to pledge never to admit Ukraine. Ukraine's military would be capped at 600,000. There's a second text, the U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine, which just today a European official confirms to me, says this: a significant, deliberate, and sustained armed attack by the Russian Federation across the agreed armistice line into Ukrainian territory shall be regarded as an attack threatening the peace and security of the transatlantic community and may lead to an armed response. The President of the United States this afternoon gave Ukraine a deadline, Thursday. And a U.S. and European official tell me the threat is if Ukraine does not say yes, the U.S. will pull out of the Pearl program, the program that sends Ukraine weapons via Europe, that is paying for them, and also cuts off intelligence. Zelensky, in his response, says, either I will choose sovereignty or U.S. partnership. So, Jeanne Shaheen.
It's not my deal.
Should Volodymyr Zelensky choose sovereignty or U.S. partnership?
Well, I haven't seen many details beyond what you identified of this peace plan. It seems to me like a plan that's been written by Russia about Ukraine, and it was done without our European partners. It was done in a way that I think fails to recognize the hard-fought sacrifices of the Ukrainian people. And it's not a peace agreement that I support, nor that I think NATO should support. Now, do I think it's important for us to achieve and to support a peace deal between the Ukraine and Russia? Yes. I think most of us who have watched this horrible war would agree that we should do everything we can to end it. It's not clear to me that that plan provides an ending that allows Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty and a future for the people of Ukraine.
And so just to be clear, you think that he should reject this even if the threat is the U.S. cuts off intelligence and weapons support?
Well, my understanding is he's presenting a counteroffer. Hopefully, this is the beginning of a negotiation that will continue, that will include the European partners, since it relies on Europe to actually provide the security and guarantees. Hopefully, there will be a recognition that giving Vladimir Putin this kind of a win endangers NATO in the future and endangers so many countries in Europe. You know, a number of us senators had a chance last week to Zoom with President Zelensky. And he opened with what I think has been an underappreciated threat on the part of many of us outside of those countries that border Russia. And that is that as they look at the buildup in Russia, and this was particularly meaningful to me as somebody on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, because we had heard this exact testimony from expert witnesses before the NATO summit this summer. His argument was, as we saw in World War II, we need to stop Putin now because he's not done here. If he's successful in Ukraine, he's going to come after the Baltics, he's going to come after Eastern Europe in ways that none of us will want to see.
And Western intelligence is that Russia is building more weapons
Absolutely.
than they would ever need in Ukraine. I'm just going to take 1 second. We only have 10 minutes here, and we're going to get to the second panel. So I promised to the audience we're going to have lots of time, or we're going to have time for questions with the panel. Let's just keep going on Ukraine, and then let's take a tour around the world. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. If Secretary of State / National Security Advisor Marco Rubio were here, he would make a few points. Ukraine's had nearly 4 years to prove that it can re-achieve or recapture occupied territory, and it hasn't been able to. The U.S. needs the weapons it's sending to Ukraine, including the Patriots, for contingencies and actual plans in both Indo-PACOM and Central Command in the Middle East. And if there's a way to save lives, as President Trump says is his priority, we should push for a negotiated settlement in which both sides compromise.
Well, that's not a compromise. That 28-point peace plan, that's a plan that Russia wrote to benefit Russia. That's not a compromise. I think most of us would agree that when you do a peace negotiation, everybody has to give something up. But Russia's not giving anything up. So we saw what they did in Georgia in 2008. We saw what they did in Crimea in 2014. We saw them go into Ukraine. And they're going to continue if we don't say enough and put some pressure on them. Look, the only thing, and we have some Russians in this audience, so I'd be interested in whether they agree with me, but I think the only thing Vladimir Putin understands is pressure. And what President Trump has failed to do is to put pressure on Putin and the Russian regime to force them to come to the table. So other than the sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft,
Which go into effect today, by the way.
yes, we have done very little to pressure Russia. We need to give Ukraine their long-range weapons. We need to give them more air defenses. We need to give them more planes. And we need to work with Europe to ensure that they can face this Russian threat. And then we need to continue. You know, we have a bill in the United States Senate that has over 85 co-sponsors, Republican and Democrat. You'd never get 85 co-sponsors on a bill in the Senate. It would put significant secondary sanctions on those countries that are still doing business with Russia. We need to pass that bill, and President Trump has refused month after month to endorse the bill until just recently, and we still haven't taken it up. So Russia needs to feel the pressure from the global community about what they're doing.
And the fundamental trade here, and I know you haven't seen this text, there's no official text, but nonetheless, the fundamental trade that the Trump administration is offering is this security guarantee. And again, we have the text for the first time. A significant, deliberate, and sustained armed attack by Russia across the agreed armistice line into Ukrainian territory shall be regarded as an attack threatening the peace and security of the transatlantic community and may lead to an armed response. Is that good enough?
Not unless we see who's actually going to defend it. And the idea that we're going to say to NATO, you can't enlarge anytime in the future, when we know that there are other countries in Europe that still want to join NATO. I mean, why are we going to handcuff NATO just because Vladimir Putin wants to make sure that Russia is able to continue to pursue its ambitious territorial agenda? I think that is just nuts, and why I certainly don't support this kind of a peace plan. And my bet is that a lot of my bipartisan senators who are here, as well as members of Congress who have been strongly in support of Ukraine, aren't going to support it either.
I see some nodding, but not everyone nodding. All right, we've only got, we've got a few minutes actually extra left. So let's try and do a few questions around the world. Let's do Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Gaza, and see what we can get through. Instability in Venezuela has produced millions of migrants flowing toward the United States. The U.S. accuses Nicolas Maduro of sitting on top of a drug cartel with $350 million in annual revenue. Venezuelans are led by Maduro, who lost a democratic election, probably 2-1, if not more. And Maduro invites Chinese and Russian presence into the Western Hemisphere. Should the U.S. pursue regime change in Venezuela?
I think Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy. I think he is promoting illegal substances into the United States, and New Hampshire has had a real issue with the opioid epidemic. But I don't think he's a threat to America's national security. I don't think that the amount of firepower that we now have in the Caribbean is warranted.
Largest probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Absolutely. And we have taken some of that away from the Red Sea, for example, where there are very real threats in the Middle East to the United States or to American interests there. And the threat of escalation, I mean, if you put aside the question about is there a legal doctrine to allow what this administration has been doing in the Caribbean, just the threat of escalation and the risk that it puts to our men and women who are serving in the military and to Americans, I think does not make the endeavor worth it.
Well, let me ask you that. You are the #2 Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, of course. There's been a very big debate, both about the rhetoric of this, but also the policy of the legality of these strikes. Do you believe the strikes on the fishing boats that the Trump administration says are drug boats, which they say drugs are a national security threat, the fishing boat strikes, but also possible land strikes in Venezuela after Monday, when the Cartel de los Soles, the cartel that Maduro heads, will be a foreign terrorist organization? Are those strikes legal?
Well, it depends on which attorney you talk to. And I think the concern, as I said, is the major concern is not just the legal foundation that is being used for those attacks. And if they're as confident about that as they indicate, then why aren't they willing to release it to the public so all of Americans can see it? But I think the greater threat is really the threat of escalation and what the harm that puts for Americans.
Let's do 2 quick more, and then we'll turn to the audience. This week's Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who will probably lead the kingdom for the next 40 or 50 years, had a royal welcome in the White House. And Saudi Arabia has been given permission to buy 48 F-35s, giving nothing on normalization with Israel. As part of that, the most advanced NVIDIA Blackwell chips, an agreement for the U.S. to build a nuclear plant in Saudi Arabia without, at least publicly so far, the text, what's known as a 1-2-3 agreement, and Saudi Arabia has been declared a major non-NATO ally. Do you support the U.S. strategic alignment that is clear that's come out of these meetings this week with Mohammed bin Salman?
I think there are a lot of questions about what we're offering them and the specifics around the nuclear deal, around the F-35s that raise real questions and that they need to answer to the same kinds of specifications that other countries have that we've sold or shared that kind of technology with. I think that Saudi Arabia, despite my concerns about human rights, has been a positive player in the Middle East right now. And it's important for us as countries to talk to people who we may not always agree with to see where our interests align. And I think this is one of those cases. But I have real reservations about what we're offering in terms of security agreements and the technology, the F-35s and the other technology. If
the F-35 sale got to the committee today, would the committee support the sale of 48 F-35s to Saudi Arabia?
I don't know without some of the answers to the questions that we don't have yet.
Interesting. All right, and then very quickly, The vision in Gaza that U.S. and Middle Eastern officials tell me right now is that the area within Gaza, east of the yellow line, east of where the IDF has parked itself inside of Gaza, about half of Gaza or so, will be developed. And the idea is that Gazans from the west side will move over to the east side. They will be disarmed as they do that, and that there will be weapons buybacks, and that this will be the beginning of disarming Hamas, and that eventually the IDF will leave and international forces will replace them on that yellow line. If that is the plan, do you think that can work?
Well, it's missing a lot of details for how that kind of plan would work. I think a ceasefire in Gaza has been a very important development. I hope the ceasefire continues. It needs to be accompanied by humanitarian aid. It needs to be accompanied by a future for a Palestinian state that so far Israel has refused to agree to.
Fair enough. Okay, we'll try and get through two very quick questions. So I'm going to go to this side of the audience. I saw one hand in the back. Muaz Mustafa, please. Quick question, Muaz, please.
Thank you. My name is Muaz Mustafa with the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Senator, thank you for your leadership on repealing the Caesar sanctions. I know...
Listen, we just heard that the House committee is going to support it, which is great news.
Confident no binding snapback provisions.
Yes, and they're
great news.
They're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Wow. Quickest question in Halifax Security Forum history. All right, in the middle, I guess. We'll go right there. That's the next hand I saw.
You know, while we're waiting, though, let me just say on Syria and on the Middle East, we have an opportunity in the Middle East that hasn't existed in generations. With the fall of Assad, with reforms that are happening in Lebanon, with the weakening of Iran, with the ceasefire in Gaza, there is an opportunity here that all of us should support and see the Middle East move forward in a way that would be a benefit not just to the people of that region, but to the entire world. So I hope that everybody will look at that and think from our various countries' perspectives how we can support the reforms and the changes that are happening there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stan Kutcher, Senator, another senator from Canada. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
We'll talk later. A real estate swap should not be the basis of a peace deal, whether you come from New York City or not. And the aggressor in an illegal genocidal war should not be the person setting the terms of the peace plan. I think those are pretty well givens that we should all agree on. You talked about allyship. What should the allies who uphold democratic values in the reality that the United States has walked away from them? What should the allies do?
Well, I think the allies have, at least based on the statements that I've seen from leaders in Europe, have indicated skepticism to opposition to what's been outlined in terms of a peace plan for Ukraine. And I thought I made it pretty clear that that's my view as well.
One last question, I think. We can get, all the way in the back, which is something, oh, sorry. Yeah, all the way back, and then we'll see if we can go back here. Yeah.
Is this on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Chad O'Carroll from NK News. We're a specialist North Korea news publication. North Korea is playing a major role in the conflict in Ukraine by supplying munitions at massive scale. Yet, in my 15 years of watching North Korea, it seems that North Korea policy across the last two administrations in the US, the current one and Biden, seems to be largely an afterthought. Given North Korea's playing...
A what? I'm sorry.
An afterthought.
Oh, an afterthought.
I'm just curious what you think explains this, given the stakes, especially in Ukraine at the moment.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
You want me to, yeah, one more? Yeah, please. Thank you very much. Down here, in the third row, yeah.
Hello.
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Nicholas from Ecuador.
Hi.
You won one of the
Yes.
videos.
Yeah. Regarding Gaza, what do you think are some things, some decisions that the international community should take to prevent Israel from absorbing some parts of Gaza, as has happened before in other wars that Israel has won?
You know, I think I'm more worried about Israel trying to absorb the West Bank than about Gaza, frankly. I think it's been important for President Trump to say very strongly that he opposes any effort by Israel to take the West Bank by force. I think right now the major challenge in Gaza is to try and ensure that the ceasefire continues and to get the humanitarian aid in there that the Palestinian people need. I mean, we're looking at another winter where people don't have houses, they don't have food, they're not getting. Part of that deal was to ensure that the humanitarian aid that the people needed got in there. And we need to continue to pressure Israel to make that happen. That was part of the deal. Now they need to perform.
It is the end of your final solo Halifax moment after 15 years. Last things to say? Any well wishes for democracy and for this forum?
You know, I was a student during the 60s when there was a lot of opposition in the US to the Vietnam War, which Canada, you rightly pointed out, you did not participate in. And I can remember being frustrated in my political science class, well, like many of my student colleagues, about the failure of the United States government to listen to the tens of thousands of people who were marching in the streets. And one of the things my professor said to me that I will never forget, he said, when enough people get upset enough about what the policies are of this government, it will change. And that is what's true about democracy. But in order for it to work, we have to participate. And it's important for people to engage, to know who your elected officials are, to know what they stand for, and to make informed decisions and to engage in democracy, because without that, it doesn't work.
Senator
So
Jeanne Shaheen.
thank you for what you're doing to ensure that it works.